The running back position is one of the stories of the 2025 offseason. With such a great draft class, so many great landing spots available, we figured we would break down an entire tier list of all 32 backfields, going over exactly the running back needs that they have, who's likely to add a running back, who could add a running back, who's in trouble of, maybe being replaced. So there's going to be a lot of layers to this video. First, we're going to talk about, the landing spots from like a draft capital standpoint and, draft standpoint. We'll also talk about the available free agents and also potentially some guys that if you have them on your dynasty rosters, you maybe want to look to shop or sell because you might be thinking, oh, Jaylen Warren's going to start for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee Harris is a free agent. You never know given the strength of this draft class. It's going to be a big time story of the offseason is how the running back landscape kind of takes shape with how good the class is, the success of the free agent running backs last year being a different storyline as well. And of course, what happens with guys like Ashton Genty and things of that nature. So like I said, we're going to go through all 32 backfields and talk about everything under the sun running back related.
Yeah, and as you guys will see in this video, once the full list is unveiled, you can make the case that over half the league is in need for a running back in some capacity. We'll talk about the teams that maybe need a lead ball carrier that might draft one in rounds 1 to 3, maybe sign a high ticket free agent, or even got teams that are more than likely going to add a back in those round 5, 6, 7 area, or potentially a third down back or a goal line back. Overall, I think there are about 18 teams that need a running back added to their backfield, like I said, in some capacity.
Yeah, and from a supply and demand standpoint, I think we got about 20 to 25 good running backs in the class who can contribute to an NFL backfield, in addition to 5, 6, 7 free agents that should be able to find roles in the NFL as well. So let's start with the top tier, the teams that need an upgrade at their running back positions. For these first 3 tiers, we've actually ranked them as far as how good of backfield landing spots they would be if, let's say, Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton, Quinshon Judkins, some of the top running backs in the class actually went to these teams. And also, for what it's worth, this upgrade needed tier is more than likely going to address the position in the draft in the first couple of rounds, just because I'm sure many NFL teams are aware that this is a good running back class and they can get their starter in the draft. So talking about the Minnesota Vikings first, they're a team that is losing Aaron Jones in free agency. We don't know if he's going to be back. We don't know if he's going to sign with another team. Maybe they want to bring him back. Of course, we're doing this before free agency, but their only running back under contract is Ty Chandler right now. And he is in the final year of his rookie deal. This team, Kevin O'Connell, this scheme, this offensive line can produce a very good rushing attack. And I think all of us would be very excited to see a high-end draft prospect land here.
Yeah, it's pretty simple for me. As much as I like the team that we're going to be talking about next, Minnesota is the clear cream of the crop in terms of a running back needy team that could add one extremely high in the NFL draft. The reason being, the Minnesota offensive line is a consensus top 10 level unit. In fact, a unit that could reach top 5 levels, assuming Christian Darrisaw can stay at full health this upcoming year. Obviously, we have Kevin O'Connell scheming that round game, a lot of continuity in that offense. The only real question mark I would say in their offensive projection would be potential volatility moving from Darnold to potentially JJ McCarthy this upcoming year. But regardless, you have the offensive line, you have Kevin O'Connell, you have a quarterback we both believe will be talented enough to get this level or this offensive level to around top 10, top 12 in the league. And if that's the case, you're getting that strong of an offense with an opportunity to add a bell cow running back. They have to be the number one priority.
Here's the interesting thing about Minnesota, though, and why they could choose to address this position with Aaron Jones or with another free agent. They only have 3 draft picks this year, only 3. They have a first rounder and 2 fifth rounders. So there's no room for them to draft a second round running back unless they trade back in the first round and recuperate some of those picks, which they definitely could do. But them taking a first round running back when they only have 3 total draft picks might not be in the cards for them. So it wouldn't be shocking to me if they chose to bring back Aaron Jones on a cheap deal.
Dobbins.
Maybe draft a 5th round running back to go with it. Maybe bring in a couple different free agents, Dobbins and Aaron Jones or something like that. So the Vikings, while they hypothetically, if they drafted Amarian Hampton or Travion Henderson or somebody like that in the first round, that would be great for all of us in fantasy land. It's possible that they won't because they just don't have the picks to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like you said, only 3 picks in the draft. I think it's an all-in or bust situation. They either are infatuated with a guy like Amarian Hampton, maybe even a Travion Henderson. Who knows what their flavor would be at that first-round pick. But it's either they're infatuated with one of the top 3 to 5 running backs in this class at that late first-round pick, or they add in maybe a dart throw that could potentially give them some efficiency. And that's why I think if they do go the free agent route, the one that makes the most sense for me is J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, Dobbins is a great fit for the scheme. We've seen him play with the Chargers this past year and run in kind of like a wide zone scheme as well. So I think he makes a lot of sense for them. I would just imagine the Vikings are going to be one of the more interesting landing spots just because they may just be like, yeah, we're just going to spend our first round pick on a running back and fix the position that way. But they have other needs. They got to do other things on their offensive line, specifically in the interior. Maybe they want to add to their defense as well. So there's a lot of different directions that they could go. Let's talk about Danny's Dallas Cowboys because the most popular fit here is that they will take Ashton Genty at 12. But here's the thing, man. Ashton Genty might not be there at 12. He might go 6 to the Raiders. He might go 10 to the Bears. Like there's a possibility he's off the board well before your guys' pick. Right now, Rico Dowdle is a UFA. He's set to hit the market. They could bring him back. He might not have a huge market and might not cost them that much to bring him back on a cheap deal. Deuce Vaughn and Malik Davis are the only 2 running backs under contract for the Dallas Cowboys right now. I think most of us would expect the Cowboys to spend either their first or their second or maybe their third round pick on a running back. And I think that's probably what's going to end up happening.
I would agree. Now, we do have Minnesota ranked higher simply because of the trust in Kevin O'Connell versus maybe some more uncertainty with Brian Schottenheimer calling the plays for Dallas. But I do think the highest upside may actually end up being with the Cowboys. Young offensive line last year, we saw them really improve down the stretch. Obviously, unfortunate that Zach Martin was to retire this offseason, but we did see once Zach Martin got hurt, Brock Hoffman, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Smith more than sufficed in the interior of that offensive line. We know Brian Schottenheimer in terms of his scheme, like we saw in Seattle, relying upon a consistent, efficient ground game, taking play action shots down the field. We do have Clayton Adams coming in now as a new offensive coordinator to implement his run scheme that he had over in Arizona. And I think the best fits for Dallas actually happen at the 44th overall pick. I think Ashton Genty is not going to be available for them at 12. I do think if he is there at 12, Texas guy, maybe they want to bring him in. He's already talked about on record to say he wants to be a Dallas Cowboy, but unfortunately, like we'll get into, there's some teams picking in the top 10 that simply may not allow Ashton Genty to fall to 12. So I ultimately think 44 overall is the running back sweet spot for Dallas, whether it's no Marion Hampton type, Caleb Johnson type. I do think they prefer a bigger back to kind of fit that stylistic mold that Clayton Adams had with James Conner in Arizona.
Yeah, Caleb Johnson and Quinshon Judkins to me are the two
as well.
44th overall worthy picks that could be that type of running back for the Cowboys. They do also have pick 76 in the draft, so maybe they love, let's say, a wide receiver at 12 and like an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, secondary player, whatever, at 44. And at 76, they still think they can get a good running back. Maybe they like an Ollie Gordon, who's a bigger back. Maybe they like a Devin Neal, who's a consistent all-around player, somebody like that. There's a lot of different directions that the Cowboys could go at running back. If I were them, just kind of wait and see what happens during the draft. When the best player available on your board in the first 3 picks is close to being a running back, you could probably just go in that direction.
And I also think the possibility also improves on day 2 for them to add a running back, because let's just say at 12 overall, they don't really see a player that really sticks out on their board. And maybe they trade down from 12 to 19. They pocket an extra day 2 pick. And maybe because they view, oh, hey, we got a luxury extra day 2 pick from trading down. Now we can have the affordability to use one of them on a running back.
Yeah. Or they could even potentially like the start of day 2, for example, and what usually happens when day 1 is over, the phones are ringing off the hook.
People get their guys.
34, 35, 36, those first couple picks of day 2, they could trade up from 44 with, like, let's say the extra third that they get for trading down and get Amarian Hampton before another team takes him, or get, Caleb Johnson before another team takes him. That wouldn't really shock me either. That's actually what happened with Jonathan Brooks last year with Carolina getting ahead of Dallas to do that.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it was almost the worst kept secret in the NFL last year that the Cowboys were going to take Brooks in the second round. And Carolina said, hey, not so fast. They went up, hopped on the phones, made sure they got their guy.
Yeah, for sure. And these next 2 teams are also, I would say, like probably in a tier with these first 2 as just how good of landing spots they actually are. The Denver Broncos, now that they have this young, fun quarterback that they have Sean Payton, who's just a running back kingmaker under contract. Javonte Williams is a free agent who's been their starter the last couple of years. Audric Estime on a rookie deal. Young player, didn't really show enough, I would say, for the Broncos to feel comfortable in saying, oh, he's going to be like our lead ball carrier or something like that. And Jaleel McLaughlin, fun UDFA, but I would imagine he's not going to stop you from upgrading.
Hear me out. So we actually recently did our mock draft, and we had Denver taking tight end in the first round. There was also a rumor that came out that Rob Gronkowski is trying to come out of retirement, is infatuated with Bo Nix. Obviously, again, it's way too early to actually incorporate that into what we think they're going to do this offseason. But if they do end up getting a Rob Gronkowski, and now that tight end need in the first round is gone, what if they become infatuated with the Trevion Henderson type? Because they've talked about the fact that they want a running back they can use as a weapon in the passing game in that Joker role. I don't think there's any suited more for that than Trevion Henderson in this class.
Yeah, and even Hampton too. If you want to
Yep.
focus on, maybe the back that you thought you were getting from North Carolina with Javonte Williams, you could get a guy who's got less knee injuries, who obviously has more juice at this point. They still have the 51st and 85th and 120th pick in the draft. So they got a pretty middle of the road, buckets of where they're going to see running back value. So even if they do take Colston Loveland or something in the first round, 51 overall, you want to take Caleb Johnson, you want to take Quinshon Judkins there, you want to take Trevion Henderson there, whoever ends up being on the board, even 85th, like into that next tier, like I talked about, Scadaboo, Gordon, Devin Neal, Tootin, some of those guys, they could all fit the bill as well.
So another piece of record as we're recording this as well, the NFL Combine hasn't yet happened, but teams are starting to meet. And there's already been interviews of Sean Payton basically implying like, hey, we need a lead runner from this class. There's already been reports that when he was with the Saints, they've had no problem taking running backs across the board early, mid, late in the draft. But specifically with Denver, they want a guy with a skill set that can be a lead runner.
Yeah, it's no secret, honestly, that last year he was trying to motivate Javonte Williams to be that guy. And Javonte Williams, I guess, has just lost too much juice from his injuries to the point that he couldn't do it. Like, there was a point in time where both of us believed Javonte could be an absolute stud in the NFL. And it's just unfortunate that he's not that guy. He's still young, but they're not going to probably bring him back. He's probably going to hit the open market, and they're probably going to go in another direction. But regardless, I mean, Bo Nix, that offensive line, good.
Number one graded
scheme.
offensive line, by the way.
Yeah, literally a great scheme for running backs as well. Running backs under Sean Payton have performed extremely well for fantasy, especially. I would be shocked if they went in the free agent direction. I think they're probably going to just be like, this is a great class. We have picks in the honeypots for the running back position. We're going to bank on getting our starter in the draft. That would be my guess, but who knows? It would have shocked me totally if they gave Najee Harris 3 years, $18 million. No, it wouldn't shock me.
I would be a little bit more shocked based off how Sean Payton has been wording this offseason. I would almost be shocked if they just didn't draft one in the class and they went the free agent route, to be honest, because the way Sean Payton has been talking about it, he said there's a ton of talented runners in this class. He specifically mentioned this class.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, most NFL teams, I think, are smart enough to realize that the place to get a running back is in the draft this year, not in free agency. So Los Angeles Chargers in the same division.
This is the wild card.
This is a wild card because, number one, I do think it is very possible that they bring back J.K. Dobbins. Of all of the 4 teams that we've talked about so far, them going the free agent route along with Minnesota would kind of make sense, considering 2 of the best available free agents are their current starting running back from the previous year at the position. So the Chargers could definitely just be like, hey, we're going to just roll with J.K. Dobbins. Maybe they still like Kamani Vidal. Maybe they still like Gus Edwards, who's under contract for 1 more year, although they can cut him if they want to for minimal dead cap implications. But if Dobbins signs elsewhere, if he wants too much money, whatever the case is, they have the draft picks similar to Denver in the honeypot of where the running backs are going to go. 22nd overall. Daniel Jeremiah had them taking one in the first round with Amari and Hampton in his most recent mock draft. 55th overall as well. Decent pick there for a running back, sweet spot. And then 86th as well into that third tier of running backs.
Yeah, number of directions they can go in terms of potentially adding that running back. We do think they are looking for that lead ball carrier, though, like we said. Do they go the J.K. Dobbins route, knowing that there is a little bit more concern? His market value is probably going up since they signed him last offseason. I think they're going to go cheap. They want to build around that young offensive line. They obviously want to get that identity that Jim Harbaugh is bringing to the table from Michigan. And for me, I keep coming back to it. I think if Omar and Hampton's there in the top 25, I believe their pick is number 22 overall. I think they're going to make him a Charger personally.
Yeah, and so here's the nice thing about the running back class is there are a couple very obvious teams that are in need of a starting running back, and there's also probably a surplus of guys who are capable of starting in the class. So the nice thing is that like some of the teams, we'll get to like the probably safe and the safe teams or whatever, they're probably not at risk of taking Quinshon Judkins in the second round, those types of teams. So if you're the Chargers or if you're the Broncos or the Cowboys, or some of these teams that like just desperately need a running back, there's enough guys in this class that you probably don't have to be impatient and trade up. You can kind of just, you're at 51st overall and you're like, Judkins, Henderson, and Caleb Johnson are still on the board and it's the 37th pick. We don't really need to move up to get a running back. We're going to just wait and see if one comes to us.
It's not necessarily discriminating like, the Broncos are the most likely to add a first-round running back of this group, or, the Cowboys are the most likely to add a first-round running back of this group. All these teams in particular have needs enough to warrant a top 3 round overall selection, and we think that all these teams are actually going to be able to address it in the top 100, hence why they are maybe a tier above the next team where, they could add a running back in the first 3 rounds, but it's not necessarily as pressing of a need as these top guys are.
Yeah, especially relative to the rest of their roster needs as well. The Raiders are the next team that we have here. And for my money, this might, other than Dallas, because they don't have Dowdle under contract, I think this might be the worst running back core in the league in terms of who's under contract. Zamir White, last year of his rookie deal. Madison is a UFA who actually started about half the games for them last year. Sincere McCormick was fun, but he's a UDFA. I don't think you're really relying on him. Dylan Laube, they drafted in the late, day 3 area last year.
Small school guy.
This is a bad running back core. This is a really bad running back core. And the Raiders are definitely in play to take Genty at 6. I think it is actually probably, if I had to put money down on who is the most likely team that Genty plays for, I actually would pick the Raiders just because they have the best chance of getting him, because they pick first of the teams that are in play for him, between Dallas and Chicago and some of those teams. Genty, if they want him to be a Raider, he will be a Raider. They have the first choice of picking him.
So when we're looking at it right now, the Raiders actually are currently plus 1,200 to take Genty. And I do think out of the teams that are listed on the odds, the Cowboys obviously plus 190, Bears are going to be up there plus 350. We'll talk about them in a second. Outside of those two teams, like, getting the Raiders here at plus 1,200, I think, is quite the steal, to be honest, because if you're at 6 overall and you view the blue chip talents being Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Ashton Genty, and Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are off the board, and there's no quarterback there, say Shadur and Cam Ward also go in that top 5, then at that point, it's like, okay, well, you're going to try to trade down, but how many teams are going to be eager to trade up if both quarterbacks and the blue chippers are off the board? And are you really just going to draft an inferior talent when you view a running back like Ashton Genty, who could be the staple of Chip Kelly's scheme?
Yeah, exactly. The Raiders have 5 picks inside the top 107.
They have the luxury of doing that.
They have the luxury of taking a running back because they can address their needs elsewhere. They also have the luxury of potentially trading down from 6 if they don't want to take Genty that high. And let's say some team wants to hop over the Jets for Ted McMillan or hop over the Jets for Mason Graham or whatever. You can trade down to 9 or to 10 or to 11 or something like that. Take Genty there because you have 37, 68, 73, and 107 already. So whether they take Genty or not, it's all but a foregone conclusion they will address a running back in this class. Pete Carroll is the head coach there. Let's remember what Pete Carroll likes to do. Pete Carroll likes to run the ball. Guys like Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, Damian Martinez, guys who can bruise an opposing defense. He's going to love guys like that in the 2nd and 3rd round area.
100%. Yeah, and again, like you said, even if it's not Genty at number 6 overall, it's an Omarion Hampton, it's a Quinshon Judkins, it's a Caleb Johnson. I would be very stunned if the Raiders don't end up with one of the 5 best running backs in this class.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in an ideal world, honestly, given how we have this tier ranked, the 5 best running backs in this class in some order, form, or fashion go to these 5 teams. Like, I think that would be the best case scenario. Like, the Cowboys get Genty, the Vikings get Hampton, the Broncos get Caleb Johnson, the Chargers get Judkins, and the Raiders get Henderson or something like that. Like, that would be perfect, right? We would all feel great. We would all know the volume that they're about to get.
100%. And again, we'll talk about some of the sneakier teams in the next row that could play spoiler in that, but we'll close off this tier with the 2 least desirable of the upgrade needed spots that we view as almost certainties to either pay a running back free agent extremely high or draft a running back in that round of 3 to 5 area is where I would probably say for both these teams. I mean, Cleveland is the wild card of them because they could draft one earlier, but if we're just specifically plotting out Pittsburgh, I don't think they add one in the first 2 rounds, but an Ollie Gordon type in round 3-4 makes the most sense in this scenario.
Yeah, like their current backfield starters from last year, Najee Harris, UFA, probably the most desirable free agent running back for most NFL teams if you had to pull all 32 GMs.
Highest projected market value.
Yeah, and then the Browns also have Nick Chubb, who's one of their all-time leading rushers probably at this point in time, and he clearly was not the same player after his knee injury last year. They're going to allow him to test the free agent market. I think it's possible that they still bring him back on a 1-year deal or whatever, but for the most part, like you said, I think Cleveland, maybe not as much of a risk to take one in like round 1 or even maybe round 2, but come round 3, round 4, given the strength of this class and the actual amount of teams that really need a running back, there's going to be guys that are top of their draft board when they get into the 3rd and 4th round because other teams are focused on drafting offensive, defensive linemen, corners, receivers, blah, blah, blah. So you might get to a point where Cleveland's like, okay, we have Jerome Ford as the only running back under contract. Nick Chubb went elsewhere in free agency. He's on his last year of his rookie deal. Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong, both of their top 2 running backs on their depth chart right now. We're going to just take Ollie Gordon in the 3rd round. We're just going to take Devin Neal in the 3rd round or whatever running back we like at that position. I think both of these teams kind of fit the same bill as whoever their running backs are. They're probably like early 2nd round rookie picks in dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah, and for those of you that are wondering at home, because we are going to be going to the next tier in a second, but for those that are curious, they might look at the next tier and think, well, some of these names are upgrade needed. Absolutely. The biggest differentiator that we had between the upgrade needed versus the likely adding tier is if they did not add a single running back this offseason, could they suffice in their run game next year? And that was ultimately the decider for some of these teams, like you guys will see in a second. And if we're just pointing out, as currently constructed, without Aaron Jones on the Vikings, they absolutely need a lead ball carrier. Without Rico Dowdle on the Cowboys, they absolutely need a lead ball carrier. Same thing for Javonte Williams with the Denver. Same thing for J.K. Dobbins with the Chargers. Any one of those top tier teams, if they did not add a lead ball carrier this offseason, would be a trouble spot for their running game.
Yeah, and like the Steelers and Browns would probably be fine with Warren and Jerome Ford, who are under contract for them. One more year for Ford. RFA tender came out for Warren the other day. They'd probably be fine with those guys. But from a dynasty lens, if you have Jalen Ward and Jerome Ford right now, I would highly suggest you shop them because there's going to be people in your league that assume they're going to start for the Steelers and Browns. And as quickly as free agency comes along or as quickly as the draft comes along, those guys could very easily never be starters. They could be replaced pretty quickly. And that's why I always do a video every April, sell these players before the NFL draft. Yeah. And it's usually running backs who are at risk of losing their job in the NFL draft. And particularly this year, when there's 15, 20 plus running backs who can contribute to an NFL backfield, I find it hard to believe that the Steelers are going to be like, yep, Jalen Warren's our guy. We're not going to put a single other guy in this backfield.
For sure. But we could move on to the likely adding tier. As you guys can see, that consists of the Chicago Bears, Houston Texans, Washington Commanders, Kansas City Chiefs, New England Patriots, and New York Giants. But we'll start off with Chicago because this is a team that I really wanted to put into that top tier because I do think they will add a running back. But ultimately, even if they didn't and they went in with DeAndre Swift, I think their run game would be palpable. But given the history of Ben Johnson with DeAndre Swift, given the fact that he literally traded him for a supplemental day 3 pick in the last stint that they had together, me thinks they're a big play for a top 10 overall Ashton Jeanty, or even potentially going out and signing a big fish like Aaron Jones.
Yeah, they could definitely add pieces to this backfield. The one thing we know about DeAndre Swift is that he tends to make coaches sour on his ability.
Yeah.
Particularly the coach that just got hired by the Chicago Bears and was paid, $13 million a year or something like that. So I would imagine that Ben Johnson is going to have total control of what happens for this team's offense entirely across the board. So the fact that he is going to be the guy making the decisions, and he already, like you said, kind of probably influenced Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell to trade away DeAndre Swift and maybe be instrumental in selecting Jahmyr Gibbs at the 12th overall pick as well. It's possible that they're like, yeah, 10th overall, if Ashton Jeanty's here, we're picking him. Like, he's just too good of a running back. The Bears, to me, are almost the opposite of some of these other teams that are in this tier, which is they're going to go big or go home on their running back. If they have Henderson at 39 overall, which is the pick they got from the Panthers in the Bryce Young trade, or 10th overall, they have Jeanty on the board. Those two guys specifically, I think, are perfect fits for what they want to do. They're a lot like Jahmyr Gibbs, which is where Ben Johnson just came from. I could see them going in that direction. However, if they miss out on those players, let's say Jeanty's off the board at 6 and Henderson's off the board at the end of the first round or something, they might just opt to add like a 5th round guy to add to the backfield because they still have DeAndre Swift making the 7th highest contract in the NFL at the running back position, and Roschon Johnson has 2 more years left on his rookie deal.
Yeah, so with Swift in particular, he actually only has 1 year left pretty much. So he technically has 2 on the contract, but they do have an out going into 2026 after the 2025 season. So if they said, hey, you know what, Swift, we've seen enough, we're going to end this contract after 2 years, they can get out at about $1.3 million in dead cap. That's why I also think Aaron Jones would make sense, where if they wanted to go with a 1-year partnership of Jones and Swift, both would be free agents the upcoming year, and then maybe they draft a big fish in the 2026 offseason. That is the only way I can see them not drafting a high-end running back this year. But ultimately, I do think that need is going to be supplemented. They're either going to draft a running back very early in this draft, or they're going to go out, in my opinion, and sign an Aaron Jones type to fit that Ben Johnson scheme. Because by all indicators, I don't think he trusts DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, not many people do. And it would be funny if Aaron Jones did go to the Bears, because then he has played for 3 of the 4 NFC North teams. That would be kind of funny. But anyways, these next couple of teams, we can almost lump them together just because of how their backfield dynamic is. With all 3 of Houston, Washington, Kansas City, we love all 3 of their quarterbacks, right? Stroud, Jaden Daniels, and Patrick Mahomes. We want running backs tethered to this backfield. That's why they're ranked the way that they are. Houston has Joe Mixon under contract, but a potential out after this season with only $2 million in dead cap. Washington has Brian Robinson, who was a free agent after the 2025 season as a 2022 running back draft member. And Austin Eckler does actually have an out in his contract right now, but we don't know if they're going to take that out. Maybe they could just keep him because he's a good veteran presence. Eckler is the one guy that I think is actually the determining factor of how high they'll draft a running back. And then with Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco looked bad last year coming back from his injury, and he has 1 year left on his rookie deal as well. Kareem Hunt, a free agent, and he's 29 years old. So we have no idea what they're going to do. With all three of these teams, I think these are the three teams that play spoiler to some of the teams we talked about in the previous tier. Like one of these guys, Judkins goes to the Commanders in the second round, or Henderson goes to the Commanders in the first round or something like that. I could see it for sure.
Yeah, so specifically with Houston, obviously the big piece, I'll actually talk about some of these coaching changes from a dynasty lens next week. But obviously the big news moving on from Bobby Slowick hiring Nick Caley away from the Rams, obviously has that Rams scheme, Sean McVay influence on what he's trying to do. Mixon is a good fit. However, Mixon has an opportunity to be on a 1 year deal. Basically, in terms of his contract right now, there's a potential out after 2025 with only $2 million in dead cap. Maybe Caley says, you know what, we're willing to ride Mixon with a workload for 1 year. Then we want an eventual successor. That's why I think they belong in this tier, because I think regardless, they want to add a running back to compete for touches with Mixon this season. But I think their eventual plan is one to succeed him.
Yeah, exactly. It's third or a fourth round running back makes sense for Houston because, like, let's say you draft Ollie Gordon or Devin Neal or Byshell Tootin or something like that, a guy that maybe needs a little bit of development and could learn from a pro like Joe Mixon. That would make so much sense to me. Like, you get Ollie Gordon, who could use a little bit of refinement in behind Joe Mixon for half the season, 3/4 of the season. He could win that job out by the end of the year.
Can I suggest a certain Cam Scadaboo to be Nick Caley's Kyren Williams?
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, my comp for Cam Scadaboo is thicker Kyren Williams.
Mine was Corum.
Yeah, like I think he actually would be a great scheme fit there. So yeah, there's a lot of guys. I think that third tier of running back is kind of where these three teams will find themselves. The Commanders being the one that could definitely, if they get rid of Eckler, could upset and take one of the top 5 guys.
Yeah, I think ultimately the way I wrote it out in the notes for Washington in particular, Brian Robinson free agent after 2025. Eckler has the out on his contract. That is the determining factor. If they let him walk, you take a joker archetype like a Henderson, like a Sampson, like a Byshell Tootin in the draft. Obviously, if you do bring back Eckler, maybe you just supplement that spot in the 2026 class.
Yeah, exactly. And these next two teams, the New England Patriots and the New York Giants, both have guys that...
One more thing with the Chiefs, actually, I do want to mention. I think the type of replacement they bring in this offseason will determine whether they view it as a compliment with Pacheco or a potential long-term replacement. If they draft a Damian Martinez type to play that Kareem Hunt role, I think there's a higher possibility that Pacheco's brought back. If they take a guy like Dylan Sampson, Byshell Tootin to be that speed back to replace what we saw from Isaiah Pacheco, maybe that's a little bit more gloomy on the long-term aspect of Pacheco as a Chief.
Yeah, and I think if they brought in a receiving back too, or a back or a guy that at least has a lot of experience catching the ball, like Raheem Sanders or an Ollie Gordon or somebody like that, that would probably spell doom for Isaiah Pacheco's ability to be on the field all 3 downs, even if we still believed in Isaiah Pacheco in the short term. But Brian Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, Joe Mixon definitely shop these guys as well because they are definitely at risk of getting major competition added to their backfield. DeAndre Swift, I would assume you guys are already shopping him. But if you're not, definitely shop him as well. Same goes for these next 2 guys. Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots does have 2 more guaranteed years on his contract, but Gibson, who's the backup running back there, has an out in his deal, and the Patriots, as you kind of write here, are pretty much a shoe-in to at least add some competition to this backfield. The question is, how high end of competition is it?
Yeah, I think that's a determining factor. You could say with Stevenson, again, 2 more guaranteed years, he's not going to go anywhere. Do you maybe want to add more of a slender speed back that can contribute in receiving downs? We saw, for example, the transition for Ramondre Stevenson, a little bit less in the receiving aspect this past year with Gibson there. Maybe that's their long-term goal, although with Josh McDaniels now taking over as OC, we don't necessarily know what his vision is for this backfield quite yet.
Yeah, exactly. So the Patriots, again, I wouldn't imagine they're going to drop a nuke into this backfield of a 2nd-round running back or a 3rd-round running back, but they could be the type of team where, some of my favorites. Yeah, like some of my favorite sleeper running backs, honestly, just I would like them to go to the Patriots because I think that in a year's time, you could see like kind of like a Chase Brown career ascension from said 4th or 5th round running back that goes to the team, like a Raheem Sanders, for example, who actually compared to Ramondre Stevenson only faster. He would be a great fit for this offense, in my opinion. Then the Giants, Tyrone Tracy obviously was a hit for them relative to cost. 5th round running back, ended up starting for them all year. Maybe they feel comfortable and confident in him being the starter. But Devin Singletary having one more guaranteed year on his contract is actually good for Tyrone Tracy, as we were talking about when we were doing this research. Because if you didn't have Devin Singletary under contract, it's probably more likely that they draft a running back at some point in the draft.
I think it's very comparable to what we saw from the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, again, comparing Tracy to Devon Achane, I'm not saying he's on the same level. It's more so you got a young, promising rookie running back, a veteran there. You can kind of compare Raheem Mostert to Devin Singletary. Maybe they draft a running back a la what Miami did with Jalen Wright to prepare for the following year. Obviously, we'll talk about the free agent running backs, Raheem Mostert being in there. Maybe they're preparing, hey, you know what, Devin Singletary has one more guaranteed year. After the year, we want a running back that can really complement Tyrone Tracy going forward.
Yeah, and I because Tyrone Tracy was a 5th round pick and Achane in that example was a 3rd round pick, I think drafting, let's say Damian Martinez in the 4th round or the 5th round or something like that would impact Tracy's value more than it impact Achane's value to have Jalen Wright added. So to me, I would be also, I know Tracy is probably worth the most out of all the running backs that we're talking about.
Highest upside for sure.
Yeah, you're going to need at least probably an early 2nd round pick to move off of Tracy and feel confident about it. But if you can get that and you want to mitigate some risk, especially if you're like a rebuilding team and you just drafted Tracy in like the 4th round and you lucked into a guy that ended up turning into a good option for you, just cash out for the profit, for the guaranteed profit, in my opinion. That's what I would do, especially on a rebuilding team.
Yeah, like I love Tracy, but realistically, I would say about the 202 is my tether line. The reason being because if you're plotting out of this class, you're assuming 2 first-round quarterbacks. That's 2 right off the board there. Top 5 running backs. I think from a talent perspective, I'd be comfortable moving from Tracy to. So you got 7 players there. You add the top 5 wide receivers in this class with the 2 tight ends. You get to about the 202.
Yeah, exactly. You swap out Tyrone Tracy for Colston Loveland or something like that. He's going to go way higher in startups because he'll be a top 8 to 10 tight end immediately after he gets drafted in dynasty rankings. So we could speed through the final tiers. This 3rd tier definitely has some risk of adding, but they're probably more day 3 caliber guys that we're talking about here. The Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals, Los Angeles Rams, Jacksonville Jaguars, and New Orleans Saints. With the Bills, it's kind of up in the air right now because James Cook is wanting more money. He wants $15 million per year. Ray Davis, they drafted last year in the 4th round. He's on the 2nd year of his rookie deal. I would say more than likely they're going to just end up paying James Cook. But you never know. They could add a running back in the class and opt to trade James Cook. He does have one more year left on his deal. So there's no guarantee that he gets extended. They could just be like, no, James, you got to play one more year of your deal and we'll pay you next year if you have a great season or something. So that's the thing with James Cook and the Buffalo Bills is that like they might draft a running back on day 3 to potentially plan for the future and move on from James Cook after this season. But he does actually have to play this year. Like he has one more year left on his rookie deal.
I think the Bills could be one of the big wild cards, to be honest. Now, we don't expect them to draft a high-profile running back, but if they said, you know what, we don't expect James Cook to resign next year. He's asking for $15 million. We're nowhere in that stratosphere. We may as well prepare to get a lead ball carrier that can contribute on all 3 downs. I can see them being aggressive because they view themselves as top-end contender. But, I mean, that's also like both perspectives. On one hand, they could view themselves as that top-end contender. Having Josh Allen, they're going to be competing anyway, so they can have the luxury of adding a running back. On the other hand, though, they can say, well, we lost a close game to KC. Maybe we don't have the priority to draft a running back here because we want to add that finishing piece to get over top of them. Like, I really do think it's a big time if or not, and it could completely impact the landing spots for the rest of the running backs in this class if, say, Buffalo got aggressive and said, we want our guy at 29th overall or wherever they pick.
Yeah, I think all these teams, honestly, are big wild cards, Cincinnati included, because Chase Brown, similar to the Giants, only I think the Bengals are more invested in Chase Brown, given what he did for them last year. He was like a league winner from a fantasy perspective. He has 2 more years left of team control where he's making no money because he was a 5th round pick. Moss has 1 year left on his deal. He's still there, apparently, and he could retire. I don't know what's going to happen with Zach Moss. I would say similar to what I said with Tracy, if Moss is there and he's healthy and he can play the backup role, that's good for Chase Brown. It means that they're probably not going to address the running back position. And with Cincinnati too, the other underlying thing with them is that they have a lot of needs on defense, and they probably don't need to draft a running back early in the draft because they have needs at edge rusher, defensive tackle, cornerback, linebacker, whatever. So Cincinnati is definitely a wild card. Like, it wouldn't totally shock me if they took a 3rd round running back or whatever, but it probably wouldn't be the best allocation of resources from like a real life standpoint.
Real quick, I do want to get a quote because we were just talking about the James Cook situation, potentially him asking for 15 million, basically what's going on with that contract negotiation. We do have a quote from Brandon Bean said on One Bills Live, what he's done, the improvement, the maturity, all that he's brought, we do want him here. But this is the specific point that I want to raise. I understand everybody wants what they believe is their fair value. Sometimes you don't always see eye to eye. And again, we don't want to talk about negotiations publicly, but I love James Cook and hopefully we can keep him in Buffalo. All that's implying is we want him here, but if he's not viewing himself fair market value based off what we see eye to eye, we can move on. Because the way he said believe is their fair market value points to me that the Bills are not paralleled with where James Cook is at in the contract demand.
Yeah, like they're probably, I'm trying to think of who would be a good example. They're probably thinking of Swift and Ramondre's contracts from last year as like maybe the starting point for what James Cook should get. Maybe a little bit more because he's a little bit younger, has a little bit less tread on his tires kind of thing.
It
But
could even be at like 10, 11, but like if he wants 15, you're not getting there.
Yeah, like you can't be asking for Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley money. Like you're just not worth that, like frankly, as a player. So that's going to be an interesting saga that kind of plays out throughout the rest of the offseason. As I mentioned with the Bengals, they're a wild card because they do have the 49th pick and they have a third round pick as well. So they could maybe decide to draft a running back. I don't think it's going to happen. The Rams, if I had to put my money on one team being the wild card, it could be the Rams because we both kind of agree that their backfield is slow,
they need physically.
Speed. Yeah, they need speed. Kyron Williams is slow. Blake Corum is not fast either. If they drafted a third round Dylan Sampson, it wouldn't really shock us because that's kind of what their offense is lacking right now. And also too, like Kyron Williams on the final year of his deal, he might decide he wants to hold out and try and get a big contract. He's had 2 really solid years in a row. If I were his agent, I would tell him, hey dude, maybe you should try and get paid because you were a 5th round pick and you don't really make that much money.
Yeah, 100%. But we're looking through some of these other spots. I mean, the Jaguars, obviously, you have Liam Cohn there. We saw the success that you guys had in Tampa Bay running 2 running backs. The problem, Tank Bigsby still kind of tethered. What do they do with Travis Etienne? Feels like more of a 2026 issue for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them maybe taking the Detroit Lions route where they draft a running back. Like, again, I think they could be a wild card as well to draft like a 2nd round Travion Henderson and then trade Etienne on day 3 of the draft. Like what happened with Swift, for example, like the Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs and then on day 3 of the draft, they traded Swift to the Eagles. Like I could see maybe ETN gets traded after they select a guy that they just couldn't pass on because he was too high on their board. Cohen loves the run game, man. Like it wouldn't totally shock me if they did address the running back position. But like you said, I think reasonably they shouldn't this year. Maybe next year when ETN's a free agent and Tank's got 1 more year left on his rookie deal, that would make more sense to me.
How hilarious would it be if they traded away Travis Etienne and with the pick that they got for Travis Etienne, they drafted Trevor?
Yeah, that would be really funny, actually. That would be really funny. And then New Orleans, too, is one of these teams that Alvin Kamara's contract is the worst structured contract in the history of contracts. And he has $40 million in dead cap still left on his deal. 25 this year, 15 next year. I don't know how they handle void years.
How do Saints fans do it?
I don't know, dude. I have no idea what they're doing, New Orleans, from a contract standpoint. I don't know how they feel about Kendre Miller, who has 2 years left on his rookie deal as well. I would say they're probably not going to address the running back position until late day 3, I would imagine, to the NFL draft. But if they don't like Kendre, it's a new coaching staff. They didn't draft Kendre. Alvin Kamara is still playing at a high level, so I can't imagine it would be like a year 1, this guy's going to start over Kamara. But a 3rd round pick at running back wouldn't totally shock me if it's the best player on their board.
Dude, I'm just looking at their salary cap table. So they currently have the 2nd highest registered cap on their team, and they're the worst cap space in the league at minus $52 million. But they're also like, what, a 5-win football team they won this year? 5 games?
Yeah, they're not a good team, yet they have some really expensive older players. Like, if I were running their team, like, you got to get some of those older players off the books.
They have 10 players making $10 million or more on their roster right now, including $52 million cap hit from Derek Carr.
Yeah.
All right.
What are they doing? What are you doing? I don't know what you're doing. We don't really have to talk about these next 2 tiers of teams. Probably safe. We have the Ravens, Cardinals, Panthers, 49ers, Bucks, Jets, Colts, and Titans. If there was one team in this tier that throws a curveball and drafts a 2nd or a 3rd round running back, is there a team that you see that could do that? Because I have one answer that I think could do it.
I mean, I think you're implying that your answer would be the Bucks.
No.
Mine would be the Panthers based on how comfortable they are with Brooks's knee because it's the second tear.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but they do have so much money paid to Chuba Hubbard. He doesn't have an out in his contract until 2027, and I still think in their mind they view Jonathan Brooks as maybe the future of their position, like 2026, 2027, and beyond. So I don't think that the Panthers would necessarily do that. My team I was going to suggest was the Titans, just because the Titans have Tajay Spears for.
I think it's more likely they add 2026 personally.
Yeah, it probably is, but Tony Pollard is a little bit older. He has an out in his contract after this season. Tajay Spears is only under contract for 2 more years on his rookie deal. I wouldn't be shocked if they drafted a 3rd or a 4th round banger running back for short yardage. It wouldn't totally shock me, but I would say most of these teams are pretty unlikely to draft a running back. And the Bucs, maybe they decide to draft a 4th or a 5th round back because Rachaad White's a free agent after this year, but I think they feel confident in Rachaad White's ability to just re-sign with the team, to be honest, because I don't think he's going to have a big market, and also Sean Tucker's ability to be a good second back if Rachaad White's gone.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at it. So real quick, the Cardinals, you mentioned James Conner, obviously Trey Benson there. They're a likely 2026 team, in my opinion, because obviously Connor got hurt at the end of the year, but did sign his extension. We do have written here that his first out is likely in 2026. So we could see them potentially running back that backfield this upcoming year. And if Connor faces some injury issues, then potentially add that complement to Benson long-term after the year. The two teams I will just group together, the Jets and the Colts. I think they're very, very similar scenarios. Jonathan Taylor contract option after 2025 with a possible extension in 2026. I think it's a very prove-it year for him. If he stays healthy, looks like prime Jonathan Taylor, I think the Colts extend him. He's their lead running back for the next 2 or 3 years, depending what that extension would look like. If he doesn't look like himself, or maybe he only plays 10 games and it's a 4.2 yard per carry year, I think the Colts will move on in the 2026 offseason. I think it's a very similar case for the Jets with Breece Hall. Breece free agent after 2025. Similarly to JT, could be that prove-it year. Obviously, we saw that fantastic second year for Breece Hall. This year obviously didn't really live up to the expectations we could have saw. So if they say, you know what, Breece Hall, we expect you to be a 1,300 yard running back by this point, and you're only giving us 4.2 yards per carry, 1,050 rushing yards, then at that point, maybe they look for a successor in 2026.
Yeah, and I want to change my answer. I think the most likely team that throws a curveball in this area is Baltimore, because Derrick Henry is 30 years old. He has 1 more year left on his deal, and Keaton Mitchell, as a UDFA, only has 1 more year left on his deal, who's the second best back on the team, and Justice Hill also only has 1 more year left on his deal. So if they wanted to draft, like for me, I've actually comped this guy just running style wise to Derrick Henry at times. I could see them drafting Ollie Gordon in the 3rd round, telling him to sit behind the king for a full year. And in 2026, he's going to be the starter. I could see them doing it.
If I had to give you odds, Ollie Gordon gets drafted by AFC North team, what would you place those odds at?
Like plus 250.
Right? Because like there's only 4 teams, and obviously it's a 4-28. You can't give it like crazy odds, but also it's like stylistically you would fit any of the AFC North teams if they decide to add a back.
Yeah, and 3 of them could use running back help, or 2 of them could really use running back help, and then 2 of them could add running backs, as we kind of just indicated here. I actually would borderline throw Baltimore into the next tier up of could upgrade. Not upgrade as in like they're going to not need him for this year with Derrick Henry there, but long term, you got to think about what your plan is at that.
Is Hill a free agent? Justice?
Hill's a free agent after this year.
Okay, sorry.
So all 3 of them, Henry, Hill, and Keaton Mitchell, are free agents after this season. So that's why I said like maybe they could draft a guy in a really loaded running back class. Somebody slides to them in the 3rd or the 4th round. It would make some sense to me. The teams that are safe, we don't even really need to address, but the Eagles, the Falcons, the Lions, Packers, because they drafted Lloyd last year and they have Josh Jacobs, we grouped them in here. Same goes for the Dolphins. They have Achane, they drafted right last year. Seahawks, Walker still has 1 more year left on his deal, and Charbonnet's got 2 left on his. Maybe they would add somebody to replace Walker in the long term, but I don't really see it.
It's pretty simple. They either have elite running backs that you don't really need to add a complimentary back to, or they have elite investment in running backs like the Seahawks do, where they have 2 guys that they took in the 2nd round in back-to-back years.
Yeah, exactly. So to summarize kind of what we were talking about throughout this video, if you guys are looking based on these charts, what would you try and sell off some of these players for? We think like if you can get an earlier 2nd round pick for Tyrone Tracy, for Joe Mixon, for Brian Robinson, for Isaiah Pacheco, for Ramondre Stevenson, you got to do it. Given the strength of this class, especially in that early 2nd, mid-2nd, even for some of those names, range.
And honestly, I would even change it at this point. I think Pacheco and Stevenson would be even the mid to late 2nds area. Like I'd feel comfortable with at this point.
Yeah, I mean, They could definitely get there for sure, because I think Pacheco still has some upside, but given how he finished out last season, it's not looking good for his future with the
It's
team.
just, if you got offered the 207 today for Isaiah Pacheco, knowing that there's a possibility they could add a running back and probably a likelihood they add one in some capacity, I think you got to take it.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong about that. I think in some leagues you might actually still get early seconds, but yeah, I don't disagree that you might actually be willing to take the 206 to the 208 for some of those guys. And then any second round capital in 26, late in 2025, you give me any 22nd or 2025 or 2026 second for DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren, or Jerome Ford, I would probably take it. I think there's going to be people out there that say, go buy Jalen Warren right now. Go buy Jerome Ford right now. And there's enough of those people that I think it's way smarter to sell them. Like, because maybe the Steelers slip through the cracks at the running back position, and the best guy that they add in the draft is a 5th round pick, and Jalen Warren is set to start for the team. I think it's significantly more likely that, given the strength of this class, they don't.
We've already heard
sign somebody.
We've already heard Tomlin talk about needing like that big ball carrier on his team in the past. And it's freaking Pittsburgh. They're going to have some 230 plus pound running back there in some capacity. Like, when have they not had that type of running back in their backfield?
Yeah, and it might just be them simply bringing back Najee Harris on a cheap deal too. Like, they could just bring him back.
Well, that's what I mean. They go from Jerome Bettis to freaking Le'Veon Bell to Najee Harris. Like, they always have a 230 pound running back on their roster. Do we really think they're going to go to the 5'8", 202 pounder and Jalen Warren as their 22 touch per game back?
No, it's almost a lock that Ollie Gordon or Raheem Sanders will be a 3rd round pick to the Steelers at this point in time. But any 3rd round picks, nobody's going to be interested in Audric Estime or Zamir White or whatever. But I mean, if somebody is, for whatever reason, sell him off your team for a 3rd round pick. Estime is the one guy where I'm like, he's kind of interesting, but I just think the Broncos are going to definitely add to this.
He was a 4th rounder in drafts last year. If you can pocket any type of 3rd, you're profiting anyways. Like, he was like the 405 in drafts.
Yeah, exactly. That's a profitable thing. I just, considering how well he scored in the prospect model, I actually do think there's some possible upside for him. But given how the Broncos are talking about their backfield right now, it's probably likely that they don't view him as like a staple. He's, at the best case scenario, Estime is probably a handcuff to whoever the starter is.
DJ Giddens or Audric Estime?
I think they play different roles, so I think they could actually coexist a little bit.
Just saying the asset.
I'd rather have Giddens.
And Giddens probably going to be an early-ish 3rd?
Yeah, it's probably about where we're looking at. So just quickly, I want to show you guys the free agent running backs that we do have available to maybe take some of these jobs, maybe to work into some of these backfields. We kind of already made reference to Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, and Najee Harris and Rico Dowdle, because the 4 highest, some of the highest rated like jobs that we have available here were the starters for last year. I think in that first tier, 2 of them will bring back their starter from last year. In my opinion, I just think just because somebody's going to sign these guys, and it could be the guys that already know them. So whether it's Minnesota bringing back Aaron Jones, I think they'd be the most likely just because of the lack of draft picks that they have. The Chargers bringing back J.K. Dobbins, I do think is very possible.
I actually disagree.
Like to go back.
I think it's so likely that 2 of them are going to sign in those first 2 tiers. But I actually think those teams in the top tier, I think it's almost a foregone conclusion for the most part that they're going to add in the draft.
Yeah, maybe we can make a little side bet on that. I could definitely see the Vikings bringing back Jones or bringing in one of these other free agents as well.
I mean, I think it's more likely that a Minnesota would actually go ahead and try to pick up more upside with Dobbins versus going and running it back with Jones.
Maybe. But it sounds like Jones wants to come back. So that's why I'm saying that they might just re-sign him or whatever. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of interesting names here. You guys can see this list: Rico Dowdle, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Cam Akers, AJ Dillon, Alexander Madison, Raheem Mostert, Khalil Herbert, Kareem Hunt. Like, if anything, these guys muddy up other backfields a little bit. Like, if Kareem Hunt signed with the Colts, we'd be like, okay, what's his role going to be? Like, how is Jonathan Taylor going to be affected? That's kind of like what we're talking about with these running backs. We're not really worried that he's going to take a job from somebody.
Would he just be the worst version of what we saw from Zach Moss a couple years ago if Hunt went to the Colts? Yeah,
exactly. Like, maybe there's one scenario where we're just like shocked that Javonte Williams got 3 years, $20 million from a team to start. Like, that would maybe be possible for one of these running backs, whether it's Dobbins, Jones, Najee, somebody like that. But for the most part, I would imagine if I had to put a number on how many of these guys are RB3s or better in points per game next year, it's probably like 1.5 to 2.5. Like there are probably not very many fantasy relevant guys for next year's fantasy season in the free agent pool.
Yeah, I might go, 2.5, 3.5 would probably be the sweet spot in terms of like realistic fantasy football upside. The one I am curious is what exactly happens with a guy like Rico Dowdle, because I think with Dallas, you're almost a foregone conclusion. You're probably just going to draft a running back. But I also think he showed enough this year as a starter, over 1,000 rushing yards, 4.7 yards per carry, to get an opportunity somewhere. Like we mentioned the Stevenson potentially like trying to fill that Gibson gap. I wouldn't even be shocked if a guy like Dowdle was brought in to complement Stevenson.
Yeah, that would make some sense. And for what it's worth, too, we didn't really talk about these guys as like sells necessarily, but most people are going to think of the best case scenario when it comes to free agency, not the worst case scenario. So if you have J.K. Dobbins on your team, Najee Harris on your team, Aaron Jones on your team, Nick Chubb on your team, Rico Dowdle on your team, whoever, and people are willing to give you market value for those players to offload that risk, like, I mean, any second rounder for Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Najee Harris, and those guys is off my team. Like some of these guys I would sell off for third rounders in a heartbeat too. So definitely keep that in mind. If you have some of these players and you're worried that they're not going to get good jobs in free agency, just see if anybody in your league wants them. Maybe they're going to think of the copium best case scenario, and you might be able to actually get a profitable rookie pick out of them.
For sure. And so to recap, basically with the premise of this video, we wanted to kind of show you guys the actual implications of these teams as to why they sorted in these tiers. If you guys are looking for more of a fit between the prospects versus the teams moving forward, we will have an official matchmaker episode where we're pairing the Ashton Genty, the Omarion Hampton, the Quinshon Judkin specifically to one team in this upcoming cycle. But for the most part, we just kind of wanted to plot out where exactly we think these guys are going to address their running back needs, not necessarily idealizing one specific prospect to them.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, in our draft guide, which is now available, and you guys can get the link for that down below in the description or the pinned comment, we did write ideal fits in each of the player profiles for the draft prospects. We would say, Ollie Gordon would fit really well with Pittsburgh, or you know what I mean? Like we would write that in the player profiles and the player cards there. So if you're interested in all of our rookie takes, that's where you can find them. All of our rookie rankings are up to date now on the site over there. Dynasty rankings undergone a big update for me, and we're adding in tiers to our Dynasty rankings as well by position and overall. So you can definitely check out all that stuff. You can get a team review from us. You can get a buy, sell, hold report from us. All of that is available over on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE for any of that stuff. A couple questions on how to redeem those vouchers, team reviews, and buy, sell, hold reports. First of all, when you sign up, you'll get a tutorial video in your email. You can check out that for any site questions that you might have. But B, you can go to personalized advice on the site, go to team review or trade question for the buy, sell, hold report, follow the prompts there, slide the slider for the buy, sell, hold report for us in the trade question, and then get those redeemed. If you are an annual site subscriber, you will get a free one for each of those by using the promo code FSE. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Comment down below. What do you think is the best landing spot for running backs? What do you think all these teams will do? If you're a fan of these teams, definitely leave any insight that you have down below. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.